few weeks ago here on my channel, I published a video where I shared some of my initial thoughts and opinions about the new GFX 100S Mark II, the latest version of Fujifilm's 100S digital medium format camera system. And the main point that I was trying to make in that video, I'll just quickly boil it down, but feel free to check out the whole video. I'll link to it up here and down below in the video description. But the main thing that I was trying to get across was that if you are, the type of photographer who primarily shoots still images, landscape photographer with the camera locked down on a tripod, the Mark II, Fujifilm didn't really add anything to the Mark II that would benefit that style of shooting, in my opinion at least. Pretty much everything they put into the camera was for the benefit of handheld shooting. So they improved things like the IBIS system, the electronic viewfinder, the responsiveness and the performance of the autofocus system, which won't make any difference at all to you if you primarily use manual focus and maybe do focus stacking with your camera. So there wasn't a whole lot, in my opinion, to really get that excited about with the new Mark II for the purposes of creating landscape images. Well, in between that video and today, my family went on a summer trip to Italy. We went to Venice for a week, which was, fantastic. And by the way, I made a video about photographing Venice, about photographing some of the quiet canals and the side streets and getting away from the crowds and all that. And if you'd like to check that out, I'll link to that up here and down below. I also wrote a blog post about photographing Venice, some tips and recommendations for it if that is someplace you intend to go to at some point in the future. Feel free to check that out. And then after that, we drove up into the Dolomites, which is only like a couple of hours north of Venice. Fantastic. I mean, it's so beautiful up there. I could live there. Maybe not in the wintertime. Well, if I did, I would have to learn how to ski, of course. But we had amazing weather, and I really didn't do any like landscape photography when I was there, the kind that you do when you get up at like 4 in the morning. And then it was not that kind of trip. Like I was there with my family and we were hiking and just enjoying it, just having a trip together as opposed to a trip where dad disappears for hours at a time and is exhausted all day long because he got up and to shoot sunrise. I learned long ago not to try and mix the two. Like when you have a family and you're also trying to do landscape stuff, the two just don't work well together at all, I think. Anyway, what was interesting about that trip was that I did bring a tripod with me, but I never took the tripod out of my bag. I shot handheld with the GFX 100S Mark II the entire time. So I got a pretty good look at the new IBIS system in the camera. So I have some images that I want to share with you from Venice, from the 100S Mark II that I think are kind of interesting, that are illustrative of the kind of performance that you can expect to see if you're thinking about getting one of these and you're curious to know. So let's jump in here. Just amazing, the interior of this place. And of course, this provides just a fantastic opportunity to be testing ISO performance, handheld shooting in dark environments, all that kind of stuff. And I shot this image using this GF 32-64 lens here at f6.4, which is pretty close to the maximum aperture of f4, ISO 1600, and then a shutter speed of 1/25th of a second. Now, as you probably know, rule of thumb, generally when you're shooting handheld, you want your shutter speed to be equal to or faster than your focal length. So if you're shooting at like 35 millimeters, you want to shoot at, your shutter speed should be at least 1/35th of a second or 1/50th or something a little bit faster. If you drop below that, odds are your image is going to end up looking rather blurry. So this is below that. Also, this 32-64 does not have optical image stabilization. So I was just using the IBIS system inside of the GFX 100S Mark II, and it did a pretty remarkable job, I think, with stabilizing the image. Check this out. This is where I focused when I took this image, and the amount of detail that there is, like in the glass here that is in the chandelier. I mean, you can even see, if we come in here really close, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this in the YouTube video, but there's like little hairs and things, like little dust mites and stuff that are like, kind of like hanging off the edge of this light fixture here. I mean, it's just incredible, the resolution and the amount of detail that this camera is able to pick up. And that's purely because, of course, it is 102 megapixels. And if you are the pixel peeping kind of person, I mean, you could do this all day. I actually have another one in here that's even slower. I shot this one at f11. I really stopped this one down. ISO 3200 and a shutter speed of 1/13th of a second. And this looks almost exactly the same as the last image. Now there is a little more noise in this. I could tell that there's a little more noise in this image than there was in the last one because the ISO has been bumped up a little bit. But by and large, it is definitely sharp. I mean, it is definitely, just a very usable image. And if I, really wanted to, I could go in and denoise this image. But in general, I mean, even at 1/13th of a second and f11 shooting indoors at ISO 3200, I think the performance is just really, really good. And I'm just really impressed with, what I was able to shoot with this camera handheld. And this image is another good example. This was shot at night, handheld, standing on a bridge, in like near darkness. The amount of detail that is in here and what this camera was able to capture is pretty fantastic. I mean, for shooting handheld, like I'm just really surprised at what it was able to do, without being stabilized on a tripod. I feel like it performed really well. And this one was shot wide open at f4, ISO 3200 and 1/9 of a second. Very slow for 64 millimeters. I mean, that's like so slow that you kind of, hear the pause when you push the button. That feeling when you hear the shutter dragging. It's like, oh boy, this is going to be kind of tough. But again, I mean, I could go in and denoise this thing and do all of that if I really wanted to, but it just performed really, really well. And I'm super surprised and just really excited about this. The thing to understand and to be realistic about with image stabilization is that it's not going to fix every situation. It's not a magic bullet. I mean, it basically only shifts like the range of acceptable, shutter speeds in order to get a reasonably sharp image, like further towards the slower end of the scale. It doesn't address everything. It doesn't fix everything. So, it performs great if you are, standing, still, maybe even bracing yourself, like this with your arms in when you're taking a handheld image. That's typically what I do so that I'm a little more grounded. And as long as your subject is still, like you'll notice that like the theater shot, that's obviously not moving. This isn't really moving either, except for the water and the canal and stuff like that. There's no other people in the shot. It's empty. In a situation like this, you can get just a perfectly reasonable, perfectly good image shooting handheld with the IBIS system when your subject is primarily stationary. Where things get a little bit, funny, and just to, kind of, demonstrate this for you, like one of the things we did when we were there, of course, was take a gondola ride around, around the canals. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just something that you do. And one of the cool things I think about taking a gondola actually in Venice is that it does then provide you with different angles and different ways of photographing the city that you can't get to otherwise. So when you get in the water, it's an opportunity to, see other things and to be photographing other things. And anyway, so, I tried shooting handheld from the gondola and nothing really worked. It didn't really work that well, even though, and let me show you what I'm talking about. So like this image here, I shot pretty much wide open at f4.5. My ISO was very low, a base ISO of ISO 80, 1/30th of a second shutter speed. And when we come in here and look at it, I mean, you can see that there is plenty of motion blur in here. I mean, it's pretty blurry. Like in my opinion, this is just not usable. And there's another one here, and this one was a little bit better. I bumped my ISO a little bit to 125, 1/35th of a second shutter speed with IBIS turned on, and still, yeah, it's still blurry. Like there's still, motion blur that is happening in the shot. So, I'm just sharing that just because I think it's important to be mindful of your situation and your subject when you are relying on that IBIS system. I think the main takeaway here is that, regardless of what type of camera system you're using, whether it's a GFX or some other type of camera, if it has image stabilization inside of it, I think the lesson here is that you can't rely on it too much. You can't just expect it to work miracles for you. I mean, you have to spend a little bit of time getting to know it and getting to know its capabilities, shooting at a variety of different shutter speeds, different ISO levels, different shooting scenarios, just to kind of build some muscle memory with the camera so you know where that limit is, so you know how far you holding the camera are able to go with it in order to get reasonably sharp images. Because obviously the goal here is to shoot at the at the lowest ISO that you possibly can to mitigate noise and all of that, but you also want your shutter speed to be high enough to get reasonably sharp photos. And based on my experience with this GFX 100S Mark II, I think the IBIS system in here is pretty incredible. I was really surprised at some of the handheld images that I was able to get. It is not, however, a particularly pleasant camera to be carrying around with you. It is heavy as a brick because the body is big, the lenses are big. I mean, it is a lot of camera to carry around. And actually the lens that I have on here right now is a lens that I wish I had when I was in Venice. The entire time that I was, in Italy, I shot with the GF 32-64. This has been my mainstay. I really do like this lens, but it does not have optical image stabilization, and the focal length range is somewhat limited too. The range isn't that great, but I like to shoot at standard focal length, so for me it's fine. But this 45-100, it definitely has more range, and it has optical IS2, which works with the IBIS system inside of the camera for even better stabilization. And in retrospect, when I was in Venice, there were a number of times and moments where I wanted to zoom further in to something, especially when capturing like details, architectural details and features and things like that. I really wanted to do more photography like that, but I couldn't with this lens. I just had to basically crop the images afterwards. So I ended up picking up this 45-100, and I'm going to be using this more in the upcoming weeks. And if I have anything more to say about it in the future, I will let you know. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to update you on some of the new things I've learned and experienced with the 100S Mark II. Since I just recently picked up the camera, I thought it might be helpful to some of you out there. And if this video was helpful, or you enjoyed it, or both, take a moment and give this video a thumbs up down below. I would appreciate it. That's it, everyone. I'll see you next time.